It is a Big Ten championship game of epic proportions set up for Saturday night, of course. We've got two 12-0 teams, number one, number two, Ohio State, Indiana. We got Coach Don Patterson here to help us break it down. So, folks, if you're not aware, Don was on Hayden Fry's staff for 19 years at Iowa, starting in 1980, then head coach at Western Illinois there for 11 seasons, and quite the storied career. And you can catch Don breaking down Iowa football with Corey Braddock from the Hawkeye of the Storm. So we would invite you to head on over there and check out Don's work along with Corey breaking down the Hawkeyes and the rest of the Big Ten. Don, we appreciate you stopping by because this should be a fun conversation as we dive into the metrics between Indiana and Ohio State.
I'm looking forward to it, Mark. I've got great respect for both teams. I'm so proud of the conference that we can be represented 1 versus 2 in the championship game.
Absolutely. I just mentioned to you that I did a breakdown where I looked at the common opponents. You've done a more extensive research, and if anyone wants kind of a feel for what we're going to talk about here for the next few minutes, you sized it up in one statement very, very well. Just think Moneyball, folks. Metrics, comparing the breakdown of the two teams. So let's start right there, just in regards to, I'll just leave it open to you to explain what you compared between these two teams and what games you used basically within the Big Ten.
Yes. I performed on these two teams, Mark, what I would describe as a bowl evaluation. Same thing I'll do for Iowa when we know their bowl opponent. And you simply look at all those games that are significant or competitive, if you will. And in the case of Ohio State, of course, it was easy to pick 9 conference games and add in University of Texas. I only went with the 9 conference games because Indiana's non-conference schedule was softer than anyone resembling Texas, so I left it at 9 teams on both sides. So I looked at all 18 games, and don't think I did all this work over the last 24 hours because, as you already know, I'm continually giving Iowa an update from one week to the next of all games played in the Big Ten. So the work was primarily already done. It was simply a case for me of going back and looking at those 18 games. And all I'm looking for, Mark, I want to know 2 simple questions. Who won the parameter? And I have 25 parameters per game. Who won the parameter? And then the obvious question, did they in fact win the game also? And I'm looking for a high correlation of winning a parameter and that parameter being a great indicator of winning the game. And so as you might, my goal, of course, is to find one that is 18-0. In other words, all 9 times Indiana won that parameter and won the game. All 9 times Ohio State did it and won the game. There were none that were 18 for 18, but we're close. And I'll explain that as we go. One of them was 100% win. The only issue was not 18 for 18. It was 14 for 14. And I don't mind telling you what it was. A little bit unlikely. It was only ranked 17 among those top 25 parameters. But that parameter is third quarter scoring. Unusual because that is not the most important quarter in the average Big Ten game. But in 7 of the 9 Ohio State games, Ohio State won the third quarter, of course won the game. Twice there were ties. And believe it or not, on Indiana's side, again, 7 wins for Indiana, and again, 2 ties. So you've got 7 for 7 on one side, 7 for 7 on the other side. So at least in terms of statistics, that would be the great indicator of who wins the game. The team that wins the third quarter should win the game. And obviously there's a lot to be said for what happens in those other 3 quarters. But I wouldn't be surprised if that holds up because it's been correct on 14 out of 14 times.
So, Don, if I can play along a little bit here, let me make some assumptions and you can tell me if I'm on the right track or not. I would think that the gut reaction of most people would be, what's the most important quarter? It'd be the fourth quarter. However, statistically, I would think, especially with teams this good, this dominant, they have such huge leads going into the fourth quarter most of the time that the fourth quarter is a kind of a random scoring margin statistic, whereas maybe the first quarter, maybe the second quarter would be more important for these two teams in particular?
Well, talking specifically about Ohio State, I don't doubt at all that Ohio State did not do that well in the fourth quarter for the reasons you've already stated. Maybe there are all kinds of backups out there playing, and truthfully, Ohio State is not overly concerned with who wins the fourth quarter. The game's been on ice for longer than one quarter of play. And in that regard, it's no real indicator for Ohio State. But let me say this about fourth quarter scoring is high on the list also. But in spite of that fact, I'm aware Ohio State's closest games were 18 points. 3 times, 18 points. Washington, Illinois, and who else? Of course, Michigan. Yeah, 18-point spread. Here's my point, Mark. They have not been tested for 60 minutes, not once. To their credit, they haven't been tested. They've been that good. So it didn't come down to a last-minute drive for the winning score. Yeah, you could argue that's not good because they haven't been battle-tested for in-the-game scenarios. And you're right. But that's a good problem to have, that you've been able to win the game without any drama at the end.
So what would be another factor that maybe not just based on what you've seen between Indiana and Ohio State, but based on your extensive research and looking at the entire Big Ten, that's another strong indicator of who's going to come out on top?
I don't mind telling you this. Over the entire, we played 81 out of 82 games now. So over those first 81 games, I've updated the individual stats even based on last weekend. I don't know for a fact that it's still ahead. I suspect it is. And that would be total offense. Total offense is number one. At least as of a week ago it was. I suspect it still is. But I haven't crossed the final numbers yet because there's still one game to play. I thought it was kind of foolish to go through that exercise and then have to go back and recompute them again based on the additional one game. But as of a week ago, number one criteria for winning, more total offense. And of course, that is right up the alley of both these teams that have been so dominant in terms of outgaining the opposition.
Yeah, I discovered in looking at the two teams against the common opponents is that Ohio State and Indiana, their yardage differential offense versus defense against their opponents was almost identical, but it was almost identical in reverse in terms of Ohio State being plus 600 to 700 yards of total offense in passing and about a little less than 300 in rushing. And it was completely flipped with Indiana. I don't know how much you've gotten to see the Buckeyes play, but of course they had a freshman quarterback and they tried to protect him from a play calling standpoint early in the season, but they have progressively kind of cut him loose. And really against Wisconsin, they really let him fire at 42 times. He threw for 393 through the air, 4 touchdowns. And ever since then, the offensive line, the pass protection has been phenomenal. And he's just been, he's an 81 or 2% completion percentage guy. So does that come into play? Is that one of your factors, completion percentage?
Not completion percentage, but a new stat I did compute for the first time and included among those 25. I dropped out, I believe it was total completions I dropped out. Total completions has very little to do with winning. What I replaced it with was yards per attempt. That is a good indicator. And I don't recall the numbers right. I don't have them in front of me, but I'm guessing right now it's still ranked in the top 6 or 7. Of all those 25 parameters, it's pretty high on the list. I'm guessing it's probably right now about 80% win if you have an edge on yards per attempt. And of course, the amazing thing about Ohio State, I remember just a week or two ago, Ohio State on the entire season, talking about Big Ten play, on the entire season, at that point, they were averaging 9.8 yards per attempt. That's a wonderful stat. If you're up toward 10, that's off the charts good. Indiana's a little lower, but still competitive, of course.
Julian Sand was not able to maintain this ridiculous statistic, but pretty deep into the Big Ten season, at one point he had either equal or more touchdown passes than incompletions in Big Ten play through like 4 or 5 games. It was pretty crazy. I'm sure people are watching this right now yelling at me, Mark, turnovers, because that's probably the number one stat that most football fans think of as, oh, well, if you win the turnover battle, you usually win. I've heard 85%, depending on obviously the margin of turnovers. And speaking of Ohio State, if you're not aware of this stat, Don, from their championship season of 11 years ago, this is an odd one right here, considering that they were playing, technically the number 2 team in the country in the national championship game. The year that they beat Oregon by 22 points in the national championship game in 2014, they lost the turnover battle 4-0 in that game. And
you're probably aware, Mark, late in the season this year, we had a Big Ten team that was actually -5 on turnovers and won the game.
Michigan Northwestern.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Historically, if you're even -3, you're almost certain to lose, regardless of who the teams are.
Yeah. So did you uncover anything really of significance there? I certainly didn't against the common opponents, but again, you looked at the entire schedule.
Well, here's what you'll find really interesting. I don't know where they are in terms of turnover margin for the entire season, but to me, it's more important to be good on a weekly basis on turnovers. In other words, if you're +5 against a bad team, +5 against Purdue, that doesn't really tell you much. Purdue's not very good. So I'd much rather be +1 for 5 different games than +5 on one occasion. Hope that makes sense to you. I'm looking for even performance from one week to the next. So here's the truth. Turnover margin is on the list. Best indicators for winning. I'm zeroing in on only the 2 teams we're talking about. So what I've done, 18 games, 25 parameters per game. That's 450 independent evaluations, right? 18 times 25.
Yep.
Turnover margin, of course, is one of those things I look for. And here's the truth. In Indiana's 9 games, they were 8-0. If they won on turnovers, they won all 8 of them. The amazing thing to me, they actually had turnover margin edge in 8 of the 9 games. They won routinely on turnovers. A lot of them were just +1. But let's face it, +1 beats the heck out of -1. You don't want to lose on turnovers. And here's the amazing thing. They were 8-0, and one game was a tie. I can't remember which game. Doesn't really matter. But the bottom line is they consistently won on turnovers. Ohio State, as you probably know, not the same case. Now, they didn't lose on turnovers, but they didn't win either. Believe it or not, Mark, in 6 of the 9 games, they were even on turnovers. Only 3 times did one team have an edge. 2 of those 3 times, it was, in fact, Ohio State. So Ohio State in the other 3 games, they won twice when they had an edge on turnovers, and they won once when the other team actually beat them on turnovers. And I don't know what game it was offhand. It was probably only -1. I do recall one of those games they won on turnovers was Illinois.
+3, I believe.
+3 against Illinois.
Yep.
And Illinois, incidentally, is the one team that had more first downs than Ohio State.
Yes. I think by a margin of 5. Yes.
Yeah. And incidentally, first downs is one of those worthwhile stats that we'll talk about. Here's the bottom line, Mark. As I looked through all 18 games, I was looking for a high correlation between winning the parameter and winning the game. And I've got 7 different parameters, all of which are 91% win or better. We've already talked about the number 1, 100% win, third quarter scoring. The only negative about third quarter scoring, it only happened 14 times out of the 18 games. Didn't happen in every game. So there are those 4 other games where teams were even with Indiana or Ohio State, 2 apiece. But going down the list, rushing yardage is number 2 on the list. Indiana won 8 out of 9 times by outrushing their opponent. Ohio State won all 9. So that is 17 out of 18. There was one team that outrushed Indiana, and Indiana won anyway. And I don't know what it was.
I think it was Wisconsin.
I don't doubt that.
Wisconsin did.
And that brings up a good point. For all I know, Wisconsin outrushed them by 12 yards. And oh, by the way, Wisconsin was just trying to shorten the game, and they finally passed them up in the fourth quarter against backup players, maybe. So that's why the stats don't give you the full picture, but you need to at least be aware of those kind of differences that maybe contribute to the unusual numbers. But the bottom line, outrushing your opponent in this game is important. It is. And for that matter, in all 81 games, it's been week in and week out very important.
We got Don Patterson here to break down the Big Ten championship game, Indiana, Ohio State. This has never happened before in the Big Ten. Both teams undefeated and ranked 1 and 2 in the country. And we got a Big Ten championship game that goes back to 2011. Ohio State's played in the most. I believe that number is 7. Wisconsin's at 6. And again, Indiana for the first time ever. If you make a historical matchup of this game, if these players had to carry the histories of the two schools into the game, it'd be like a 50-point spread on the game. But that's a bunch of nonsense, and obviously has nothing to do with the two teams this year. Don, you got a chance to see these teams a number of times, but the game that sticks out is obviously the Indiana game at Iowa, in which it was tied late. You could make all sorts of what-if situations that if Mark Gronowski was healthy in the fourth quarter and he completes some fairly easy passes, one in the flat in particular, that maybe Iowa pulls off the upset. They have one of the better field goal kickers in the nation. He missed one with about a minute left. Phil Parker probably plays a different defensive scheme, protecting a lead versus going for broke on a third down, and Indiana wins it with about 45 seconds left. What most impressed you about Indiana, and maybe on the flip side, because Iowa was pretty effective defensively, especially where they might be, not vulnerable, but more human-like?
Yeah, I remember the game well, of course, and talked about it at length on the Iowa channel with Corey. The thing that stuck in my mind, you mentioned at the end of the game, Iowa had the ball. We were already in field goal range. And if we make a first down on that third and 5, I believe it was actually a good call. People sitting next to me, they said, "You got any thoughts on what the call should be?" I said, "I'd like to go back to another screen pass. Very safe play. Should be an easy gainer. Let's go ahead and maybe convert on 3rd and 5. If not, we're still looking at a shorter field goal than what we have." And when you know it, the backup was in for that. And he'll remain nameless, but he made a poor throw into the dirt, incomplete. We missed a 42-yarder, which is unusual for Drew Stevens, as you know. If we would have converted on that 3rd and 5, and incidentally, it was definitely there, I'm confident in saying we would have at least made a first down. We might have even gone for a touchdown. That's how open it was. But at the very least, we pick up 5, and now that means we're going to take the clock down to nothing. And on the last play of the game, it'll be a mid-range kick to win. At worst, maybe a 30-yard kick. I doubt that Drew would miss that. It's possible he would have missed it. He's only human. But he wouldn't have had quite as much pressure, because if he missed it, it would only go into overtime anyway. But it was tied up at the time, as you know. And the bottom line, it fell incomplete. And we missed the kick. And Phil Parker, as you know, is a great defensive play caller. The sad aspect of that game, as you well know, we brought pressure one time too many, and they made us pay. And it was a great call on his part. And Surratt went for a touchdown, and the game was over. But when we had the ball on that 3rd and 5, I'd be willing to bet you Vegas at that point had an Iowa win, probably somewhere in the high 80s. 80% at least chance for Iowa to win this game. We're in the last minute of the game already. If we would have converted that play for a first down, that percentage would have gone up to probably 90 or more, because we had them on the ropes. And to their credit, they survived. Incidentally, that's one of my concerns if I'm an Ohio State fan. This guy, Mendoza, has been under the gun and passed it with flying colors. He made a believer out of me against Iowa. If you saw the game, Mark, you remember it. We went with more pressure than we normally do, and we got to him a lot. And he got pasted a few times. And he impressed me because he managed to disregard it and get back up and play again. He made some great throws with people right in his face. And I'd vote for him for the Heisman right now. And that's not to take anything away from your quarterback, but he's faced more adversity than your freshman has. Your freshman's done a great job. And you shouldn't ask for him to play any better than what he's played because he's played off the charts good. Matter of fact, he's going to get a lot of votes for the Heisman too. I doubt they don't win it if only because people kind of frown on a freshman winning that award. But what a great young quarterback. And to your coaching staff's credit, done a great job of bringing him along too.
Yeah, a couple more intangibles on both sides from the way I see it in terms of quarterback play is, you outlined beautifully the Mendoza play against Iowa and against one of the best defenses in the country. And then you fast forward a few weeks and he partially got them into trouble with a bad decision and an interception, but that's going to happen. Sometimes, in these conversations that we have with fans and viewers and in the chat, the expectations of these players and especially the quarterback play is a bit ridiculous. I think many of our viewers watch too much Sunday football and they expect these guys to be Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. But anyway, Mendoza makes a mistake. Indiana's in a hole. And of course, Penn State did not have the season expected, but man, the defense is still loaded with talent. And for him to drive the field twice in that final 2.5 minutes and make some of the throws, the catches were phenomenal, but he put that in a tight window a few times under heavy pressure. That last touchdown pass in the back of the end zone. Yeah, there was a guy right in his grill as he was delivering the football. So that was mighty impressive. So he's done it a few times. I really liked him, Don. I'll just mention this. Sorry to cut you off. I really liked him. I'd seen him play quite a bit at Cal. And obviously not with the weapons or the offensive line. He was sacked more than any quarterback in the country the year before. Actually, he had taken quite a beating, but he's obviously an excellent talent.
It's funny you mentioned that. As we were getting ready to play Indiana, I'll count myself as a skeptic. I thought, well, he played at Cal, but I wonder if he played in hostile environments at Cal. Yes, he did. And he played well in those games, even at Cal. The game I thought you were referring to when you mentioned an interception was the Oregon game. That's another prime example.
Yeah, pick six.
Pick six. And now they're behind on the road at Oregon. You remember what happens on the next drive, Mark? 75 yards for a touchdown to tie it up all over again on the very next possession. And a lot of it was due to accurate throw on his part.
So those are a lot of the intangibles on Fernando Mendoza's side. I'll go to the Julian Sayin part of this. And you're right. He can't create a fourth quarter, 2 minutes to go, we're down by 4 situation. Ohio State's just been that good, that dominant. However, what impressed me was they got off to a really shaky start against Michigan.
I was hoping you were going to bring up Michigan. Yeah. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about.
The defense gives up a field goal, which is like, I'm sitting there with 2 or 3 other Ohio State fans, my buddies, and when Ohio State gives up a yard, they like practically are jumping off cliff. It's unbelievable. So anyway, they weren't even pleased with 27-9, but that's another discussion. Michigan scores. Then he comes out, his first throw picked off. Michigan scores again. And then for the team not to punch in a touchdown and they get stonewalled at the goal line and have to kick a field goal. Sure, it was a score, but it kind of, if you know the series and the way it's gone and how they've gotten bullied for 4 years, it was kind of like this, they can't push in a 6 plays within the 3-yard line, kind of that deal. But with him being new to this series, never playing against adversity per se, and throws a pick on the first play, and really his first 4 or 5 passes in total weren't quite up to his standard. And then for him to bounce back and play that well. And Don, I'll add one more caveat to it that didn't hit me. It should have. But in comparing he and the Michigan quarterback going into this game, no comparison from from the standpoint of polish and accuracy and really refining their skills at this point. But from the standpoint of, as you mentioned, Michigan comes back after 5 turnovers and beats Northwestern. Bryce Underwood had to lead a 4th quarter drive with kind of their playoff season on the line with 2 losses and was able to do that. Julian Sayin had never done that. And then it kind of hit me as the weather was moving in Saturday afternoon. I thought, Julian Sayin's a Southern California kid. Why has this not hit me before? He's playing in snow for the first time which seems like no big deal for the rest of us that have grew up in the North. But for a Southern California kid, the biggest game of his life, he's suddenly got to deal with these elements he's never dealt with.
And the scoreboard's not cooperating either at that point. And I'm sure the crowd was really into it in the early second quarter, or maybe it was even later in the second quarter. I can't remember. But I do know that he faced adversity like he'd never seen before. And honestly, I would imagine it would be difficult for him to handle it so well if it would have happened earlier in the season. But by the time game 12 rolls around, he's more than prepared for it. And he proved that against the Wolves.
Don, you brought up the Illinois game, and that is a game that a lot of people brought up in comparing these teams early in the season, because Illinois turned out to be a good football team, decent football team, maybe not quite the team that some expected, but still a solid 8-4 football team. Indiana that was the game of the early Big Ten season that all off season I was like, I can't wait for Indiana, Illinois, because one of them's going to step up as, being the challenger to the big boys to a certain extent, or at least that would be the perception. And Indiana just, there are no words to describe what they did to Illinois. 300 plus yards rushing, and held them to 2 yards on the ground, 63-10, or 63-10. And then Ohio State goes into Illinois, and it's not a performance to be criticized, but it was more methodical, just kind of workmanlike effort. They only had a 20-10 lead at some point in the second half, and it was still a ball game. Then they put it away 34-16, but it was nothing sterling. So a lot has been made of that. You can also point to the Penn State game. They played Penn State back-to-back weeks, and Ohio State was more impressive, and they did play that game at home. But it's interesting to make those immediate comparisons against maybe better teams.
Right. Of those 5 common opponents, I am aware the only time IU and Ohio State went to the same road site for a game, common opponent was Purdue. I think it means next to nothing that they put up more points against. The spread was bigger for Indiana than it was for Ohio State. I think that means next to nothing, because I do believe one coach is maybe a little more concerned with running up the score than the other coach. And Ryan Day's in the category of, I think, being more concerned about getting the players, the backups, the time they deserve, to have them ready to play if they have to replace the starter. So that's just the impression I have of Ohio State versus Indiana. Of course, we know Indiana, if they can make 100 against Purdue, they do it, because there's no love lost between them, much as there is between Ohio State and Michigan.
Don, you may have come across this just in your studies, but it's been outlined by the Fox crew during the Ohio State games the last few weeks. And this is kind of goes against what most people think of Ohio State football being, because in Urban Meyer's later years and going into the Ryan Day era, it was high flying, throw it all over the field, run up the score, that sort of thing. Well, they certainly still have those kind of weapons to do it, but they have played more methodical football from the standpoint of they have run the play clock more than any team in the nation. They have used the play clock and have run less plays on offense and defense than any team in the nation, because they're trying to prepare for a long playoff run. Right. And they lined it up against some of the other top teams in the nation, and they will have, this was with a couple weeks left, have rested their defense to the point where they will have played the number of plays of almost 2 full games less than just about all their playoff competitors by the end of the season.
Which might especially pay off when they're playing game number 15 and game number 16.
Yeah, so that's an interesting stat, because they've kind of made a transformation in that way and maintained their identity, but still a transformation. You bring up rushing yardage and the comparison between the two teams, and that obviously was a big deal in the Ohio State win, because the winner of the rushing battle has won 24 consecutive Ohio State-Michigan games. And I, like a lot of people, thought, well, Ohio State doesn't need to win the rushing battle. they could lose it by 50 just so they're respectable, and they could give up probably 170 and rush for 120 and they'll be fine. But they held Michigan to -8 in the second half, and they won the rushing battle by about 85 yards in that game.
Of course, I'm very familiar with all those years at Iowa. I'm very familiar with Ohio State football, and of course, very familiar with Indiana football too. To me, what's amazing when you look at common opponents again, I know you're aware of this, but to me, it's worth mentioning. Isn't it amazing that both teams have given up a total of 50 points in those 5 games?
Okay.
Dead even.
Yeah.
As you know, Indiana has put up more points than Ohio State, but again, I don't think that means much of anything. I do think it's more meaningful that both teams have given up only 50 points, 10 points a game. That suggests really good defense for both teams.
The thing that the stats can't measure, but certainly you dealt with it for 30 years, is the psyche of the athletes and their competitive nature. And I think in terms of the conversations that I have again with fans, they're maybe too apt to think, well, these two teams are both in the playoff. What do they care about this game? They're both going to be a top 4 seed. What does it really matter? Rest some players. But we saw, not to this extent, but we saw the same circumstances last year with Oregon and Penn State, that they were both going to be in the playoff. They both earned it. They were already there. And we saw a heck of a football game, and I didn't see any lack of effort. So I do think that we shortchange these student athletes sometimes in regards to putting it out on the line. We see teams all over the place in all the conferences that have virtually, quote unquote, nothing to play for late in the season. And they're playing just as hard as the teams that have tangible incentive. And again, I think it's a credit. So I don't think we're going to see any kind of letdown. I think both of these teams want to win a Big Ten championship. I think for Indiana, it's obviously something that is just kind of out of their realm that would just be historic. For Ohio State, I think that Ryan Day has made it clear that they haven't won the Big Ten title in 5 years, and they believe that they should be at the top of the Big Ten.
Well, in that regard, you're right. Indiana obviously hadn't won a Big Ten title, Big Ten championship game, but neither has Ohio State. So I think it carries every bit as much value with Ohio State as it does Indiana.
Coach Don Patterson, Iowa football, coaching under Hayden Fry there for 19 years, and then Western Illinois head coach. There you see the dates right there. Don, we appreciate you being here. I want to make sure that there's nothing that you uncovered that were some hidden gems that we missed here.
Well, I mentioned there were 7 different parameters that had a high winning percentage associated with them. We've already talked about third quarter scoring, rushing yardage, first downs. Number 4 on the list, and it is also 17 for 18, is the first touchdown of the game. The first touchdown of the game. Yes, it's important. Matter of fact, a lot of these, I'll just go through the Ohio State numbers. Rushing yardage, 9 for 9. Outrushed every opponent, 9 for 9. First downs, 8 for 9, the exception being Illinois. And of course, the game wasn't that close, so maybe Illinois gained several of those first downs when it didn't matter at all. First touchdown of the game, 9 for 9. Illinois comes in 8 for 9. I'm sorry, Indiana, 8 for 9. Fourth quarter scoring. I don't think it means much, but it still says so much about Ohio State. They were still 9 for 9. They won all fourth quarters. And in many cases, they were doing it with some backup players. But I guess my point is they still didn't let up, not for a minute. Even if the backups went in, they knew they're determined to get off the field without giving up a touchdown too. So the culture has never been better for Ohio State defensive football. I've seen a lot of really good Ohio State defenses. I don't think any of them have been better than this one. I bet you'll agree with me.
Yeah, I am right there with you. They have been stout for sure. Absolutely.
And then beyond that, the last 2 categories, red zone appearances. Excuse me. Red zone appearances. Again, Ohio State 9 for 9. Indiana 7 for 8. There was one opponent that had more appearances than Indiana. Don't recall who. The point is, I'm just zeroing in on Ohio State's numbers. 9 for 9, 9 for 9, 9 for 9. A lot of them are 9 for 9. The one that's hard to explain, turnover margin. Turnover margin, Ohio State, 2 for 3. One concern I have, and any Ohio State fan should have that same concern. I do think it's important. You don't have to win on turnovers against Indiana, but at the very least, you better be even. Don't be -1, because if you're -1, you may lose. If you're -2, you're even more likely to lose, as you know. On average year, -2 is probably about 80-something% win in the Big Ten. I'm sorry, if you're -2, 80-something% you'll lose in the in the Big Ten. So my point is, even is probably okay because you probably win. But if you're -1, you're flirting with a bad outcome against a team as good as Indiana.
Don, are there any of your metrics that are related to the kicking game and special teams?
Well, yes, there is. One in particular, and that would simply be average starting field position. A prime example, you're familiar with Caden Weegan, of course. Our game against Nebraska, you're thinking, I'm sorry, I got to back up a week, don't I? Yeah, it was the Michigan State game, I guess. 147 return yards. Just so you know, I do have a prediction model based on all Big Ten games. You'll find this interesting, and your listeners will too. That prediction model only involves 4 parameters. And there's only 2 people that know what they are. It's me and it's Kirk. Kirk first knows. I shouldn't say that. His assistants know, at least the coordinators know, I'm sure. And I don't doubt that the players know, but they're not going to talk about it because we have got it down to 4 parameters. If you win more of those 4 parameters than the opponent, your record this year in all Big Ten games, 66 wins and 3 losses. 96% win. That's a good prediction model. It doesn't get much better than that. No. Because it's hard to have anything that tells you the winner 96% of the time.
Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal. I was going to kind of go that route when you bring up a prediction model, because this sounds like something that a lot of people would want to get their hands on to try to predict football games and bet football games. Obviously, that's not your incentive. You're trying to provide information for a football team to prepare and understand, okay, we need to be tightened up in this area more so than this area and so forth. Yeah, you could certainly predict better games, predict probably with a better winning percentage than I can by just taking a shot in the dark.
You mentioned that I mentioned the game with Michigan State.
Yep.
Here's the truth. One of those 3 exceptions was Iowa versus Michigan State. Based on those 4 parameters, Michigan State should have won the game. The only reason they didn't, the hidden yardage behind 147 punt return yards made all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And as we saw against Nebraska, we saw it throughout the season, but Nebraska is coming to mind that, of course, Weegan had one big return, and then the next time they wouldn't punt to him, and obviously it was a bad punt, and they set up in good field position as well. Absolutely.
That reminds me, 1982, we were playing Tennessee in the Peach Bowl.
Yeah.
And Coach Fly said, Reggie Roby, I'm talking about, still got the NCAA record. And they had a guy named Willie Gault, you might remember.
Yep.
One of the fastest human beings playing football. And Hayden said to Reggie, I want you to punt the ball off the field every time, all day long. Your goal is Willie Gault gets no chances on punt returns. At the end of the game, Willie Gault hadn't touched the ball yet on a punt. And the beauty of Reggie Roby, he was still long enough, and he had it down to a science because he practiced for the bowl game, barely getting the ball off the field, whether it be punting left or right, whatever was appropriate. And he was able to do it with great consistency. It was just barely get off the field, rather than so many punters like the Nebraska punter that airmailed it up in the seats, and now it's a 25-yard net punt. And you're almost wondering that maybe we would have been better off just to punt away.
And for those that remember Reggie Roby, he was distinguished by the length of his kicks, but also you knew it was Reggie Roby punting because he looked so much different, his punting and the high leg kick, than any other punter in the nation.
I always said, if a punter has hang time above 5 seconds, a lot of great punt returners lose their nerve on a ball that's up there more than 5 seconds.
27-22 comes to mind for that Iowa-Tennessee game. I might be wrong on that, but I
It
usually
sounds right. It was a close game.
Scores usually stick in my head, and I do remember that one. Excellent. Well, Don, we appreciate you stopping by and breaking this thing down for us. So based on reviewing all that, and it sounds like both teams are almost 100% excellent in all those areas, is there any kind of a lean that you have going into this one?
Yes, let me talk about those 25 parameters again, except I'm only going to focus on the top 15 parameters. Those obviously carry a lot more weight than the next 10. Top 15 parameters in 9 games, that'd be 135 parameters. This will blow your mind. How many did Ohio State win? They won 111 of those 135 parameters. How many did Indiana win? Believe it or not, 111. Same number. Here's the difference. How many of them did the opponents win? In the case of Indiana opponents won 18. Think about it, that's only 2 out of the top 15 per game. 2. That's pretty good to beat them 111 to 18. Now I'll give you the good news. Ohio State did even better. Ohio State opponents only won 14 of them in those 9 games. Total domination really on the part of both teams.
Yes.
But if you give an edge to someone, you got to give it to the Buckeyes.
Yeah. It sounds awfully close. I don't think there's an edge there, but that's about as close as you can get. 111 to 14 versus 111 to 18, and obviously the remainders are ties in those categories.
Right.
And Vegas says about Ohio State about a 5-point favorite is what they're telling us, but they obviously look at some of that, I'm sure, but some other things as well.
I will not be surprised if it becomes a one-score game, if it ends up as a one-score game. And in that regard, Mark, it wouldn't shock me if it comes down to the last play. I'm reminded of 1 versus 2 back in 1985. That was a regular season game. And you remember the game involving Iowa, Michigan. It came down to the last play of the game. We beat them 12-10 in Kinnick. And that was a great football game. And I suspect on Saturday night, we're going to see another great football game that really does a great job of showcasing Big Ten football.
I just don't think it's going to be 12-10.
Me neither. I'm sure it won't.
Don, thanks so much for taking the time out. Corey set this up for us, and I appreciate Corey offering this up. And thanks for stopping by. It was great to talk to you, sir.
Well, Mark, I always enjoy listening to you. And believe me, even though I'm an Iowa fan through and through, I still have a great appreciation for what Ohio State's been able to accomplish, not just this year, but for decade after decade. I have a lot of respect for Indiana for what they've done too. So I've always said, people have asked me through the years, toughest place to play. It's always been an easy choice for me. It certainly wasn't the Big House. I've always voted for the Shoe.